So this week we are starting a new study. We're looking at Psalms. So this is one that we have not done before. I have not ever taught this one, so this is all new to me as well. It's a whole different feel, but we're doing Psalms Part 1, and this will take us through the end of April. Before I forget, we will not be meeting next week because I, like Carla, will be in the car. And I can't do the class from the car. So we'll have to skip next week, but then we'll restart it again at the 1st of April. Okay, so we're looking at Psalms 1 through 5 this week. And we're going to take them and they're kind of related to each other. So if we kind of follow that connecting of each psalm, but the Psalms are kind of like a hymn book. I was trying to think of it's like our hymn book, how there's different aspects of the songs that we sing, different topics that each one deals with. If you go through our hymn book, you can see it's divided into different subjects. So I kind of feel like the Psalms is like that. These were songs that they sang. I don't know. I could never sing one of these. I don't know what tune they sing to, but it's the idea. If you think about our hymn books, about how you praise God, and if you look at all the words of the songs, it's like asking God for things or praising God for what he's done, or pointing out like our doctrines are in there in the songs. But this is kind of the basics of Psalms. They were sung. So you'll see in some of the headings where it says we'll say to the choir master, and for stringed instruments or for flute. So it's about singing and praising God and exalting God. And we see that what people are pointing out their hearts about. So this is what we're going to be looking at. And so we're going to start with Psalm 1. Psalm 1. There are two types of people in Psalm 1. Who are these two types of people?
They were the righteous and the wicked.
Yes, the righteous and the wicked. This is a good way to start the whole Psalms because it really identifies basically the two ways of life. There's the believers and the unbelievers, the righteous and those who are not walking in the way of believers. So we look at these two types of people, and let's compare them. I think you had a little chart on day 1 of the lesson to compare the righteous and the wicked. So if you want to look at that and just see what you listed, what are the main facts about the righteous that you see?
Well, I put that the righteous doesn't walk with the wicked, doesn't sit with the scoffers, and delights in the law of the Lord and meditates on it.
What does that mean to meditate on it?
You have to spend time with it.
Right. As opposed to what? As opposed to just reading it, right? Process it, meditate on it. What does this say? How does it affect me? So the righteous, the blessed man, the righteous do not, they do not walk with the wicked. They do not sit in the seat of scoffers. They are not on that path of life, but they delight in the law of the Lord. What else do we learn about the righteous?
They're metaphorically compared to a tree that does not wither, yields fruit, and prospers.
Right. And where's that tree planted, RJ?
Don't know.
Okay.
Anybody? The stream. There we go.
Yes, there you go. By the streams. So, I mean, what's significant about that is planted by the streams of water?
That hopefully it won't experience drought, depending on.
It's refreshed.
Mhm. So the roots are right there by the water, right? They're gonna be able to reach that water. It's planted by the streams of water. And he prospers, okay? Anything else about the righteous that you noticed?
The Lord knows the way of the righteous.
Mhm.
It yields fruit.
Okay, they yield fruit. Planted by the water, they're getting fed, they're yielding fruit. And compare this now with the wicked. Contrast it with the wicked.
They're like the chaff that the wind blows away, drives away.
Mhm. Yeah, opposite of bearing fruit, right? So chaff is just blown away, but the righteous are bearing fruit. What else do you see about the wicked?
They will perish.
Okay. They will perish.
They won't stand in the judgment,
Okay,
nor do
So
they
the
get to
judge-
associate with the righteous.
right, right. They will not get to associate with the righteous. There will be that division. Probably makes you think of the judgment and when the wheat is separated from. Yeah, I see Carla shaking her head, yes. So it's the separation. What does it mean? What does it mean to be blessed? It says blessed is the man who walks not with the wicked, but the righteous. It wasn't in your homework, but what do you think when you hear blessed?
I think of the Beatitudes. We
Okay.
often will throw out the term, oh, I'm so blessed, indicating that we are materialistically wealthy, when that is not what is contained within the Beatitudes. It is those who are humble, those who are meek, those who are suffering, those who are lowly. They are the ones who are considered to be blessed.
Yeah, that's what I was wanting to get at, was it's not about what we receive, like wealthy things, but it's more of the character. Right. Mhm.
I think
I
of it
read, go
as
ahead.
having, I think of it as having joy in your heart, regardless
Mhm.
of your circumstances.
And Blythe, we're gonna get to that in the Psalm 4, right? The joy, right? So that's a good thing to think of, right? So it's like you're in a right relationship with the Lord, and so you are prospering
Mhm.
in bearing fruit and prospering in the joy and the peace, all of that, because you are not walking with the wicked. Anything else you see about these two, the righteous and the wicked? Okay, so we know we are all among those who are walking in the way of the Lord. So we should be understanding that we are blessed. We are bearing fruit in its season. We are planted by the streams of water. We are meditating on the law. We need to meditate on the law, I should say, right? And that's what we're doing every week as we get together in Bible study. So let's move on to Psalm 2. Psalm 2. So this psalm overall, who is this psalm about? Who are the characters in this one?
It's about Jesus.
Well,
Okay, and Darlene, where do you see that? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, it talks about the Son in verse 7. Lord said to me, "You are my son. Today I have begotten you."
And in verse 2 also, it says, the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed,
Hmm?
which would be Jesus.
Also, I think verse 6 is about Jesus, isn't it? That I've set my king on Zion, my holy hill.
Hmm? Okay, since you are jumping right to that, I want to go to the cross references about these verses on page 10. And ask you, what did you learn about the cross references from Acts, from Revelation?
Well, in where in Acts 4, 24 to 28, it tells us about Herod and Pontius Pilate, who were like the kings and rulers that conspired with the people and the nations, who were like the Gentiles and Jews, against Jesus. Like it was kind of like a parallel.
Mhm. Anything else from the cross references that relates to this psalm?
I thought it was interesting in Micah and Zechariah that the nations will eventually be united.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, RJ?
I thought it was interesting in both Micah and Zechariah, it indicates that the nations who have risen against the blessed ones will eventually become united with the blessed.
Yeah, that is, I didn't really pursue that. Yeah. Okay, so we see in Acts, we see reference to this psalm, but I want you to think about, this is one of those cases where it's a now and then. So you have what's happening in history that is a foreshadowing of what will happen with Jesus, a fulfillment. So in David's time, right now, David is king, and he's a literal king of a kingdom of Israel. But then you have God calling him my anointed. So David is the anointed king. Remember the Davidic covenant. I think you looked up that in the lesson. The Davidic covenant that David would always have someone to sit on his throne. And from him comes Jesus. So you see the prophecy here, you see the actual ruling, what's happening in history, but then you see that as a prophecy about what will happen with Jesus, God's anointed, and sitting on the throne. So this is one of those things where it's both now and it is to be fulfilled later. So you actually have, and that makes sense when you hear David's plea to God about help me, okay, because my enemies are against me. Well, literally that was happening. So with David, the question is, why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The nations you have are the actual rulers around the countries around them. So what's happening? If you think about that historically, why do they rage and plot in vain? What are they plotting?
Same thing that they're doing today. They want to get rid of the Jews.
Okay. So they're counseling together. These are the nations of the world counseling together against David, the appointed king of Israel. What do you see about that plot? What is God's view of that? You're looking at those first 6 verses.
Well, in 4, it says, he who sits in the heavens laughs. the Lord holds them in derision, and he will speak to them in his wrath, terrify them in his fury, saying, as for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. So that's now and then too, talking about both David and Jesus.
Exactly, exactly. So this plot that these actual nations are gathering together against King David, is that going to succeed?
No.
No, it says, why do you plot in vain? When God has anointed this, then you can't win against that. So you have David just questioning, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? And then God's view of that is this is ridiculous. My paraphrase. This is ridiculous. I'm in control here. And you look, if you see this, it's this whole thing is like the now and then, the now and then. When in 7, when he says, the Lord said to me, you are my son. And if you'd looked at the cross-reference in 2 Samuel, he was talking there about David as the king. Is that making sense?
Mhm.
Okay, so if you go back to 2 Samuel and read about David, he does, as he's anointing David as king, he says, you are my son. You are my son. And that's the foreshadowing of Jesus when God is saying, you are my son, okay? What about verses 10 through 12? There's a warning here. Who is he warning?
The kings and rulers who are conspiring against David.
What is he saying to them that they should do?
Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. And they should kiss the Son.
Okay, talk to me about that. What would that represent? Think about right then in current history, in the king. What would that represent?
Like honoring him, like kiss the ring of the king, or
Exactly, right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because he's the one, he has the authority. He's been anointed as king. He has the authority. And so the warning to these rulers around them is that you need to honor him. Right? You need to honor him. Kiss the son. That's a picture of paying homage to the king, of being subject to that king. Lest he be angry and you perish in the way. And then how does it end?
blessed are all who take refuge in him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, blessed are all who take refuge in him. So these rulers and these kings of the surrounding nations who are plotting against David, the king, they're not going to succeed. And David is saying, you need to kiss the son. You need to kiss the son. This plot, it's in vain. So you need to recognize who's in charge here and who put him in charge, and that your plot to pull away from that rulership is not going to succeed. And warning then, you should kiss the son. You should recognize who's in charge, and you should serve the Lord with fear.
And that's why
That's your option.
I apologize. I had read further than verses 1 through 3, and it is in Micah 4:6
Okay.
through the end of the chapter, which delineates specifically how all nations will come together and the plowshares will be, or the swords will be beat into plowshares.
Yes.
So I read
Yes.
ahead. Apologize.
Thank you, because I was thinking, why didn't I see that? No, but yeah,
Right. I'm sorry. I tend to read entire
no, yeah,
segments,
no
not
problem.
just partial.
Yeah, and that is at the end. That's how it will all come together. But right now you've got this, the nations going against God's appointed. But in the
I
end, it will
also
all
read
be,
this, oh, I'm sorry.
go ahead.
I also read this as a foreshadowing of Jesus too, and the son, both David and Jesus, and that ties in with the Revelation and the verses that we're reading and Micah and Zechariah. Jesus will come back and he's going to rule with an iron scepter.
Right. So that's this whole thing is like, especially with David, because we know that David is like this prototype. So Jesus is going to come from the line of David, but David is used throughout this as a picture of what it's going to be like when Jesus is appointed king. Because when God said to David, "You will not be without someone to sit on your throne," Jesus comes from that line, so he will be the one to eventually sit on the throne of David. You'll see that in Scripture, sit on the throne of David, and so you do have this parallel. And this is what it will look like in that point in history, but that will also look like that in the end when all the nations will be subject to him. Okay, good. It's just to get, to be thinking about how that all fits together, because it really is about the earthly rulers at that time going against Israel. But we have that again right now, going against Israel. So the future, we know what the future is, but it's just like getting to that point. It's not always easy. Okay, so I'm glad that you can figure that out. It's like we go to cross references to show you that this is the fulfillment. Acts, Revelation, all of these things. That's why we go to cross references to say this is the picture that is the fulfillment of what you're reading here in Psalms. Okay. Anything else? Any other comments about this? About 1 and 2? Anything we learned from David at this point, from this psalm? What can you know if things are going against you? If enemies are going against you, what can you know?
God is our refuge.
Right, right. He is our refuge. Okay, let's look at Psalm 3. The superscription at the top, what does it say?
A Psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son.
Okay. Yeah. What did you find out about that when you looked up about Absalom in 2 Samuel?
Well, I remember that story from Sunday school because I always had that visual of him hanging by his hair from a tree. But I don't think I really got it when I was a kid. But I mean, Absalom, go ahead.
Boardroom, who was speaking? Can you repeat it?
Absalom was going to overtake David and his household.
Right, and who is Absalom?
His son.
Yeah,
Through Bathsheba.
his son. So he's plotting to overtake the kingdom from his father. And this psalm was written when David is running from him because that is happening. See, this is again, it's happening literally in history. So
I thought it was
David,
interesting that there were 4 full years where Absalom was undermining him in the gates of the city. That's a long time for a king to sit and allow a usurper to do what he was doing.
It
I think
is.
the factor in that though is that it was his son, and I think he was his favorite son too. So
It was- Yes,
probably tended to look the other way more when it's, you know, someone you love than if it was, you know, just someone else in the city.
well, that's where he was the son of Bathsheba, so he was definitely adored.
Okay, so let's look at, so that's the setting. This is what's happening. David is running from Absalom. It has been out secretly gathering troops. And the people's heart, because he was at the gate for so many years, the people's heart had turned to him. So David says to his people, we have to get out now or he's going to kill us all. So they leave. So now let's look at the psalm. How did verses 1 and 2 relate to David's situation?
Well, he's describing to God exactly what he's facing. You know, he's presenting his concerns to him. Look what's happening to me. I've got all these foes and they're rising against me. And they're scoffing at God, you know, there is no salvation for him in God. They don't even fear God.
So this is the thing about the Psalms that we want to always watch is like, people are honest when they're just pouring out their heart about what's happening. They're honest about it and just stating the facts. And he says, people are saying that you aren't there to save me. You can't save me. But what is David's understanding? Where do you see his heart in the midst of this running from Absalom? What does he know about God? What does he state about God?
Salvation belongs to the Lord.
And he acknowledges, in these next several Psalms, I circle and put big star around but, and that's where you get the contrast. You know, he says, I'm facing this, but I know you are my shield, my glory, my lifter. I know when I cry to you, you will answer me from your holy hill. I mean, he reminds himself of who and what God is and what he's done for him in the past, I think.
So how significant is that when you're in the midst of a desperate situation? And what would your tendency be when you find yourself in a desperate situation?
I had fun looking at the personal pronouns with this one because in the first one, the emphasis is on self. Oh, poor me, I'm in this particular situation. And when the but occurs, at that point, it's balance between the personal pronouns of self versus the personal pronouns of God. So there's this balance. And then as you continue looking at that, it shifts entirely to where the very last stanza emphasizes entirely God. So it is a shift from self-pity toward realizing, you know, but you are a shield. You're a lifter of my head. I cried unto you, when he actually took the time to address God and say, help me. I know that you're here. That moment of assurance is where it shifted from self-pity into adoration of God's power.
And in verse 5, it even shows that he was coming to a peace about it, that he knew the Lord was there, so he could even go to sleep.
Right, right.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting because usually when you're just, I mean, in those situations, sleep doesn't come. You know, it just doesn't come in your mind as going crazy. But he's like, no, I trust so much. He is my shield and I trust so much. I can sleep. I will not be afraid of the many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. I will not be afraid. What do we learn? What do we learn from David's perspective here? From how he's responding to a difficult situation?
I feel like the pattern of this one is he says what the problem is, he reminds himself of who God is, and then he can rest in him and have assurance of his salvation. So it's just a roadmap of how to deal with a difficult situation. It's beautiful.
Yeah, he obviously had great confidence in God, and maybe that's the way we measure. You know, we bring our concerns to God, but then do we just keep on worrying about, I guess the proof of the pudding is how do you sleep after you've brought your concerns to God? Do you sleep or are you still restless and worrying about these things? Then it says, well, yeah, maybe you don't have so much confidence and faith in God.
Yeah,
But it's
good
even
point.
more that I just think it's even more that it's not even just that he slept, because I think there's two sides of that. I think that sometimes when things are too hard, all I want to do is sleep. So it says I slept, but then it says I woke up, like, because the Lord sustained him to wake up.
Mhm. I love that. Yeah, I've been in not a distressful situation, but a situation recently over the last several months that I've had to find an answer to. And I've looked in all these different directions for an answer, and I wasn't getting anywhere. And I'm one that likes to solve problems, so I'm thinking, oh, I could do this, or I could do this, or I could do this. And none of those were seeming to work out. I just kept hitting a wall. And finally I just said, okay, God, I don't know now. I don't know what to do. And so I'm just going to have to let you figure it out and show me what the answer is. And then I'm just resting, like, okay, I'm waiting for God to show me the answer. Okay. And that just happened this week. And I'm like, oh, that's it. And it wasn't at all what I was expecting. But the answer came once I said, okay, God, just figure it out. Okay. And I'm at peace with letting him figure it out over the last couple of months. And now here's the answer. So yeah, just letting him take it and not keeping control of it. So I'm able to sleep and not think about that problem that had to be solved. So it's my human nature to just keep control of things. And then when I couldn't control it, I'm like, God, I don't know. You're going to have to figure this out. Like he didn't know that in the first place, but I'm like, I get it. You figure it out and just let me know what the answer is. And I feel like David is just doing that. He's telling him and then he's resting in it and waiting for God to answer. He says, I call on you in the morning and then I wait. Then I wait.
Yeah, what
Anything else?
you're talking about is like verses 7 and 8. Because again, he says, arise, O Lord, save me, God. I know that you can. And then verse 8 says, oh yeah, salvation belongs to the Lord. You're
Right.
going to bless your people.
Right. Right. I know you can. He's confident. I know you can. Reminding myself, yes, God is able to do this. And once, I mean, David just keeps going back to this. I know you can. I know who you are. Whenever anything coming against him, the first thing he does is says to God, I know you can do this. You are my shield. You are my shield. And I think, that's where if we keep in the word, if we meditate on the word, then that stuff that comes to us in these times of trouble. And it's a reminder, I know you are my shield. Was anybody making the list, keeping your list on what you learned about God? About the Lord on page 133? Did you go along making a list of what we learned about him? Nancy, thank you. You're shaking your head yes. So I was reading over that this morning, my list, and it was just so comforting to list everything that we learned about God from these Psalms. And if anybody has it in front of you, just take a look at it and share some of the aspects of God that we see here in the Psalms.
The Lord sustains us, the Lord saves us, salvation belongs to the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The Lord hears us when we call to him. We can put our trust in the Lord. He has put more joy in our hearts. You alone, O Lord, make us dwell in safety. You hear our voice in the morning. That's some of them.
Yeah, thank you, Darlene. To just make this big picture of who God is and what he does for us and read over it and review it is very, very comforting, very encouraging. Okay, let's move on to Psalm 4. See what this one is telling us. How does this psalm begin in verse 1?
Well, again, he's crying out to God.
Again. Do you think that God gets tired of us crying out to him?
No.
Mm-mm.
That's a rhetorical question, right? Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, because you were all frozen. Thank you. Yeah, my internet is going in and out. Okay. Do you think that God gets tired of us calling out to him?
No.
No.
No way. David is calling out again. What is his concern this time? Who's he talking to in verse 2? Talking about?
Worldly people, the
Mhm.
unrighteous. He says men, but he's talking about men who do not trust in the Lord.
Mhm. Yeah, what are they like? What are some of the ways that he describes them?
They love vain words and they seek after lies.
What's the contrast in that verse?
It's the but again.
Mhm.
Know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. When the righteous call, he hears.
So what do you have here is like, he describes these wicked men, that kind of goes back to chapter 1, right? The wicked and the righteous. So you have these men in that category. And he describes what they're like, but he says, but know that the Lord sets apart the godly for himself. So then his addressing these men, what is their only recourse? What is he saying to them? What is your only recourse?
To put your trust in the Lord. In verse 5.
Yep.
I think it's interesting in verse 5 also, it instructs them to offer right sacrifices. If you contrast
yes.
that with Amos, for example, who in chapter 4 calls the sacrifices empty and meaningless, where they had made the transition from just a verbal acknowledgement of, yeah, this is what we should do. David, and I look at it more from his perspective as a king, he's encouraging his people. He's trying to reunite perhaps his people after Absalom had spent 4 years undermining him entirely. He reminds himself and his people to not make it an empty gesture, but to make it something that everyone internalizes and personalizes.
And I think he's warning them not to sin against God by going after David, by wronging David. This isn't going to get you anywhere. So your only recourse here is be angry and do not sin. Do not sin in this. And offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord. Kiss the Son. Kind of kiss the Son concept. What are people saying in verse 6?
They're looking for a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
Who will give us something good? A blessing as we tend to in America identify it, material happiness. I'm hearing some voices, but I'm not seeing. I think it's external. Okay. When at the end of the psalm, David says, here's this thing, Blythe, about the joy. So what does he say here about God?
That God,
There are many.
in verse 7, that God has put joy in his heart, more joy than they have when their grain and wine, like that's their material good wealth.
Right. Yeah. Right.
The joy is worth more that God gives.
Right. Because he said to them, put your trust in the Lord. And then he's explaining this, like, when you do that, you get the joy, you get the blessings that are far beyond what you can find in the harvest, the grain, in their celebrating that. And again, you have this joy. You've put more joy in my heart than anything else. And as a result of that, what can I do?
In peace, I can sleep.
Mhm.
The theme of rest was something that the Lord brought to me when we retired. We had to retire early. It was kind of a stressful situation. And I just asked the Lord for rest in him. And that's something that over these years of retirement, I have learned to appreciate more and more the rest, the peace, that joy that's that deep that I can just rest in peace and sleep.
That's a good answer. You cry out to God and he hears you and he answers. So we have in this psalm, it's like the joy, the peace, and dwelling in safety. So where does all of that come from?
Put in your faith and trust in God.
Yeah. Meditating, trusting in him, crying out to him. Joy, peace, dwelling in safety. And David is in a position of not being safe at this point. But spiritually, he feels that safety, that shield, that protection, that joy. Any other observations about chapter 4? Okay, let's look at 5. Again, how does it start?
Listen to me, Lord.
Yeah. When you pray, do you ever do that? When did you start your prayer by saying, listen to me? Thinking about that. Not a bad idea.
Well, and
Yeah.
that's where this one specifically was written to be sung by a congregation as well. It
Okay.
was a group praise, if you will, rather than the more personal ones of 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, these psalms again were sung in the temple by the Israelites over the years. But they come from real life situations, written about real life situations, which most songs are, right? Give attention. Give attention to the sound of my cry, my King and my God. For to you do I pray. In the morning you hear my voice, and in the morning I prepare sacrifice, and I watch. I pray and then I watch for you to answer. Okay, now who is he talking about next? Why is he saying, I know I can pray to you? I'm frozen again. You are frozen again.
Well, I assume he's talking about his enemies, he says.
Okay, you're
"Your
back.
God
You were all
delights in
frozen.
Oh. You hear us now? No?
No?
She's frozen now on mine.
Okay,
she-
all right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm really unstable here.
There, now I see you. Oh,
Okay. Okay, he's praying to God, and what does he know about God? What is he confident of about God in verses 4 through 6?
He knows that God doesn't delight in the wicked, the evildoers, the boastful, those who speak lies, the deceitful, the rebellious.
So he knows he's on the same page with God, right? He knows that.
Mhm.
He knows God does not tolerate that. So then he says, but verse 7, what's the contrast?
through the abundance of your steadfast love, I can enter your house. And I think it's not because of anything that David's done. It's all because of who and what God is. Because of his abundance of steadfast love, I will bow down toward your holy temple in the fear of you.
Absolutely. This is that whole idea again of respecting, of kissing the Son, respecting that authority and who God is. And I know that you don't tolerate the wickedness. And so it's like, what is he asking next? I know I can ask you this, God, because we're on the same page. I know, and I respect you and I can bow down. Then what is he asking about these people, these wicked people?
He wants them to bear their own guilt
Mhm.
for their bloodthirsty, deceitful, lying, boastful ways.
So interesting that before he asks God to judge these people, he says to God, I know you don't tolerate this kind of character. So judge them, cause them to bear their own guilt. Again, contrast then, but what's the next piece? Look at verse 10. Look at the end of verse 10. He's asking for them to bear their own guilt. Because of the abundance of their transgressions, cast them out, because they have rebelled against you. These are people who have rebelled against you. This is that category of unbelievers. But what's the end of this?
But those who take refuge in you rejoice, and they have joy. Your protection is over them.
Let those who love your name
Exalt in you.
exult in you. Tell me what it means to exult in God.
Jump for joy.
Oh, good. That's a good one. How else do you describe exulting in the Lord?
Be joyful, rejoice, triumph, be openly happy.
Openly happy, singing praises to him. When we sing, we exalt him, we lift him up. Because, verse 12, exult in you because, see that word for? That's why. You bless the righteous. You cover him with favor as with a shield. There's the whole idea of the shield again. So what do we learn overall in these 5 Psalms about the righteous and their enemies? David is a righteous person, but he has a lot of enemies. What do we learn from him about how he's dealt with people that are coming against him?
The evil won't stand. It will be dealt with.
And he is putting his trust in the Lord to save him from those enemies.
He's also
He's a
encouraging everybody to make it right with the Lord too. He keeps calling them back to God.
Right. He's warning those unrighteous people, look, you need to trust in the Lord.
Yeah, Linda, that's one thing I really appreciated or got out of these first Psalms that we looked at, the ones written by David, because you can read in 2 Samuel about David's life and the troubles he went through. But I think the Psalms really brings out his heart, and you really understand, what he was thinking and how he was feeling about what he was going through. And it really brings out his strong faith in the Lord. So, I really appreciated seeing sing that side of him. Really can understand why God said he was a man after his own heart. So it's a good study.
Yeah, I agree. A good study and a lot for us to learn from David's example. But again, he cries out, he cries out and then expects God to answer. And God does. So he's again rehearsing who God is. And if you look at your list through all 5 Psalms, it's just a really great reminder of what God does for us and who he is. So let's remember this week to be like David when we are faced with difficult situations. Carla, I was thinking about you and on your trip, and I was thinking about these last few verses of Psalm 5. I can't find my psalm now. About singing and exalting and joy, having the joy in every situation. But it's like, I'm just going to read them for you, Carla, on your way to say goodbye to your father. But let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Rejoice. Let them ever sing for joy. You are a singer. Sing for joy and spread your protection over them. That those who love your name may exult in you. For you bless the righteous. You cover him with favor as with a shield. And those verses just brought you to mind today as I was reading them at the end of this lesson. So that's my prayer for you. That's my prayer for all of you, but especially for Carla on her way to send her dad off to glory. Okay? Rejoice and sing. Rejoice and sing. Okay, so next week we will not be meeting because I will be on my way back to Chicago. But April 1st, then we will continue with lesson 2.